Rain came sideways, cutting at my face. My tools lay scattered where my son-in-law had thrown them. He smirked. "Careful, old man. Your whole life is right there. Don't leave anything behind." 44 years I carved the wooden shapes that other men stamped their names on. I never once asked for credit. I only wanted peace. 12 hours later, a lawyer called about a dead friend and asked if I knew my true worth. Rain came sideways that Friday, cutting at my face. My tools lay scattered across the driveway where my son-in-law had thrown them. He stood up under the porch light where it was dry, and he smirked at me. "Careful, old man. Your whole life is right there." He tipped his chin at the concrete. "Don't leave anything behind." It was 8:40 in the evening, the first Friday in November, on Poplar Heights in Bucyrus, Ohio. Kip came down 2 steps and pressed a fold of bills into my coat pocket, the way a man tips a kid who carried his bags. $200. I know the number because I counted it later, sitting on a stranger's staircase. And what shames me is not that he gave it to me. What shames me is that I counted it. Behind him, the storm door opened, and my daughter came as far as the threshold. Delphine had her arms folded over the front of a gray cardigan I bought her 2 Christmases back. She looked at the floorboards. She looked at the porch rail. She looked at every single thing on that porch except me. "Dad?" Her voice came out level and rehearsed and quiet. "Please don't make this a scene." 7 words. I have turned those 7 words over more times than I can tell you. And the part that gets me is not cruelty. There was no cruelty in them. There was embarrassment. Somewhere in 15 months, I had stopped being her father and started being a scene. A thing that might happen where the neighbors could see it. Then the storm door closed, and the deadbolt turned. It did not slam. That is what I want you to hear. Somebody put their hand on a brass knob and rotated it a quarter turn. And that small sound went through me like nothing has gone through me since. Now, I should tell you what a man like me does at a moment like that. Because I know what you are hoping I did. I did not pound on that door. I did not stand in the yard and holler up at the windows. I knelt down on the wet concrete, and I started picking up my tools. Chisels first. I laid them in the tray by size, 1/4 inch through 1.5 inches, the way they had ridden in that box for 44 years. Then the gouges, sorted by sweep. My hands did it without asking me. There was a 1/4 inch of standing water in the bottom tray, and I remember thinking I would have to oil every one of them before morning. And I remember being glad about it, because it was a thing I knew how to do. The marking gauge was lying by the storm drain, out past everything else. It had been my father's. Beechwood, brass thumbscrew, worn down over 80 years to about the color of a coffee ring. It had come apart clean at the stem, the way beech does when it finally goes, and both halves were sitting in the gutter with the water running over them. My father was a molder at the works on Southern Avenue. He put a chisel in my hand when I was 11 years old, and he told me one thing that stuck. "Get the pattern right, Delmar. The pattern makes every single thing that comes after it. Get it wrong, and you have made the same mistake 10,000 times over in iron. And not one of those 10,000 is going to have your name on it to tell anybody whose fault it was." I picked up both halves of that gauge, and I put them in my coat pocket with the money. When I stood, my knee took a second to agree with the idea. 70 years old, and most of them on a concrete shop floor. I stood there in the rain getting my balance, and I noticed the mailbox down at the end of the drive was hanging open. The little door dropped on its hinge the way it had been most evenings that fall. Kip always brought the mail in. 5 o'clock sharp, before he even got his boots off. At the time, I thought that was one of the 2 or 3 decent habits the man had. I looked back at the house exactly once. Upstairs on the left, the light was on in my granddaughter's room. And I hoped she was asleep, and I hoped she was not at the window. And down at the far end, past the garage, the door to the room where I had been sleeping since June stood wide open, and the room behind it was black. Nobody had turned the light on in there. Nobody was going to. Here's a thing I have not said out loud until right now. And I am going to say it because I have been lying to myself for most of my life, and I am too old to keep it up. I knew. Not the date, not the rain. But I had known since August, the way you know a bearing is going out from the sound of it a long while before it ever ceases. I had known it every time a plate got set down in front of me a little too hard. I had known it, and I had gotten quieter and quieter. And I had made myself smaller in that house until there was almost nothing left to throw out. So I did not argue with him. I said one word, Kip. He waited under the porch light to see whether anything else was coming. Nothing else was coming. That was the whole of what I had in me that night. One syllable. And it was his name, not mine. I got the box closed, and I picked it up. 44 pounds. And I had carried it up and down those shop stairs so long that my right shoulder still sits lower than my left. The rain was going straight through my coat by then, and I could feel the 2 halves of my father's gauge knocking together in my pocket with every step. I walked down Poplar Heights toward the streetlight on the corner, because a streetlight was the only thing out there that looked like it wanted anything to do with me. And somewhere between the second mailbox and the third, it came to me, calm and plain, the way bad news usually does. I had nowhere to go. There was one light still burning on Sandusky Avenue at 10 o'clock that night, and it belonged to Fairbank Upholstery. I stood outside it a good while before I went in. Rain running off the awning in a curtain, my box getting heavier by the minute. And behind that lit window, I could see an old woman working a bolt of vinyl through a walking foot machine, like the hour did not concern her at all. She looked up before I knocked, waved me in with 2 fingers, the way you wave in somebody you were already expecting. "You're soaked clean through," she said. That was the first thing Ludi Fairbank ever said to me. Not "who are you?" Not what happened, just a fact, stated plain. The kind of fact a person says when they intend to do something about it. She had a room over the shop she let out from time to time, she told me, when somebody needed one. $300 a month. First week free if I wanted it. And one question before she'd hand over the key. "You snore." I told her I did not know anymore. My wife would have known. She had been gone 3 years. Ludi nodded like that answered something else entirely, and gave me the key. The room was small and slant-ceilinged, the kind of room built for somebody's unmarried aunt back when houses still had those. It smelled of hide glue and horsehair from the shop below, and there was one window that looked out over the median strip the town called the Boulevard. I set my box down inside the door, and I did not unpack it. I just stood there, dripping on the floorboards, feeling every one of my 70 years in my knee. And I thought, this is where I live now. 15 months I had been circling toward this room without knowing it. I want to walk you through it, because when I finally saw the shape of it laid end to end, it took the wind clean out of me. It started the week after I sold the house on Plymouth Street. 41 years in that house. Merritt and I raised Delphine in it, and after Merritt passed, I rattled around in it alone for 2 years like a bolt in an empty drum. And when Delphine called and said, Come stay with us. Dad, plenty of room. I believed her. I want that on the record. I believed her. The first month I had the guest room down the hall from Nell's. Good light in the mornings. Then Kip needed some place to keep his files, some venture he was starting. And the guest room made more sense as an office, didn't it? And would I mind terribly taking the room off the kitchen instead? I did not mind. I told myself I did not mind. 6 months after that, the room off the kitchen turned out to have a leak nobody had mentioned, and while they got around to fixing it, it seemed simplest if I bunked in the space behind the garage. 8 feet by 10. A single window with plastic sheeting stapled over a crack in the frame, and a space heater on a long orange cord, because the furnace did not reach that far. The leak in the kitchen room never did get fixed. I was still in that back room in June. I was still in it tonight. Not once in 15 months did Delphine say a word about any of it. Not the guest room, not the leak, not the cord running under the door. I used to catch Kip on the phone to some buddy of his, laughing, calling me the live-in handyman, not even bothering to lower his voice. And I would be standing right there, holding a bag of groceries I'd carried in from the car. And I would set the bag down and go back out for the rest, like I had not heard a thing. My daughter heard it too. She was standing at the sink both times. She never once turned around. I am not telling you this to make you angry at her. I am telling you because I need you to understand what I did not understand until I was standing in a strange room with rain still running out of my sleeves. 15 months, and never once did she stand between us. Not once did she say, "That is my father. Watch how you talk about him." I kept waiting for it, the way you wait for a part to come in the mail. I kept thinking, it will come. It never came. I set my tools out along the windowsill, the chisels in their tray, the 2 halves of my father's broken gauge laid side by side, like something that could be mended if a man had the right glue and enough patience. I did not have either one that night. I slept in my coat, on top of the covers, because it did not feel right yet to get comfortable. Sometime past 9 the next morning, my phone went off on the sill where I'd left it charging. A number I did not know. Area code 419. I let it ring twice before I picked it up, the way you do when you already suspect that whatever is on the other end is going to ask something of you that you are not ready to give. I let the phone ring out. Whatever it was could wait until I had my boots on. But something in me would not let it alone. 41 years of habit does not switch off just because a house does. Saturday mornings I used to walk the 2 miles over to Plymouth Street and back. Not for any reason, just to keep the knee loose. And my feet took me there again that morning before my head had voted on it. The house looked different already. New people, 3 months in, and somebody had taken down the storm door I hung myself in 1991 and put up one of those glass ones with the fake grill work. There was a boy's bicycle on its side in the yard where my tomato bed used to be. A woman came out on the porch before I got the nerve to knock. Younger than Delphine. Not unkind, just careful. The way you are careful with a stranger standing at the end of your walk at 9 in the morning. "You're Mr. Quist," she said. Not a question. "We have a stack of your mail. I kept meaning to call the number on the forwarding slip, but it never seemed to connect to anybody." She went inside and came back with a rubber-banded bundle thick as a dictionary. Catalogs. A card from the VFW post. And underneath all of it, a photocopied form from the Postal Service. The kind you fill out when you want your mail sent someplace new. My name was on the signature line. I want to be plain with you about what I felt looking at that. It was not my handwriting. I have signed my name something close to 100,000 times in my life. on time cards and pattern drawings and the backs of Ovid's old work slips. And I would know my own hand the way I would know my own face in a mirror. Whoever signed that form made my D lean the wrong way. Small thing, but a man who has drawn to the thousandth of an inch for 44 years does not miss a thing like that. "Everything all right?" the woman asked. I told her it was fine. I did not know yet whether that was true, and I did not have the strength that morning to find out standing in her yard. I thanked her, and I put the whole bundle in my coat pocket, unopened, on top of my father's 2 broken halves of a marking gauge. And I walked back toward Sandusky Avenue with a headache starting behind my left eye. I did not open it. I want that understood, because it matters later. I carried 4 months of my own mail around in my coat like it was somebody else's problem. Because that morning, I did not have room in me for one more thing. The phone rang again on the walk back. Same number. This time, I answered. "Mr. Quist, my name is Imogene Falk. I'm an attorney here in Bucyrus." A pause, the kind a careful person leaves before bad news. "This is regarding Ovid Brannick." I stopped walking. There is a particular kind of quiet a man's chest goes into when he hears a name like that from a stranger's mouth on a Saturday morning. And I stood there in it a good while before I found any words. "Is he all right?" "I'm very sorry, Mr. Quist. Mr. Brannick passed away on the 29th of October. I understand you were close." The 29th of October. That was 2 weeks gone already. 2 weeks. And nobody had thought to walk up my old front porch and tell me. And I stood there on the sidewalk doing the arithmetic on that before I could even begin to grieve. "I'd like you to come in this afternoon, if you're able," she said. "There are matters concerning his estate that need your attention directly." I told her I would come. I did not ask what matters. 44 years around men who build things, and you learn that the ones who need something from you always tell you eventually, in their own time. And pushing at it early only slows the telling down. I hung up and stood on Sandusky Avenue with the mail heavy in one pocket and the marking gauge heavy in the other. And Ovid Brannick's face came up in my mind the way it always did. Not old, not sick, just leaned over a bench with a pencil behind his ear, same as he'd looked the day I met him. 42 years we had known each other. I had not seen him in 8 of them. That is its own kind of grief. The kind that comes with a bill attached. I could have driven the 11 miles out to his place on Kilbourne Road any Sunday I pleased. I never did. There is always a reason not to, when you tell yourself there will always be another Sunday. There was not going to be another Sunday now. I turned toward Falk and Associates, 3 blocks up on the west side of the square, and I put one foot in front of the other. And I did not yet have any idea that the woman waiting for me in that office was about to hand me a number I would spend the rest of this story trying to understand. I had never earned and had somehow already paid for 42 years before I knew the bill was coming due. Imogene Falk's office sat on the 2nd floor above the old hardware store, and the light coming through her window that afternoon had the flat gray look of primer paint, the kind we used to spray on a pattern before we could see whether the surface was true. She was a trim woman, maybe 55, with the sort of handshake that tells you exactly how much of her time you are about to take up. She did not offer coffee. She got straight to it, which I came to be grateful for later, though at the time it felt like being handed a hot piece of iron with no gloves. "Mr. Quist, I represented Ovid Brannick for 11 years. He named you sole beneficiary of his estate." I heard the words. I am not sure I understood them, not right away. Sole beneficiary is the kind of phrase that sounds like paperwork until somebody starts reading you the numbers behind it. And Imogene Falk read them to me slow, like she had done this before with men who needed the slowness. 8 filling stations across 3 counties. 7 pieces of commercial real estate. An investment portfolio, she said, totaled $14,600,000, built up over 3 decades of a man reinvesting nearly everything he made instead of spending it. $18,600,000, all told. I did not say anything for what she later told me was close to a full minute. I sat in that chair with my coat still dripping a little onto her floor. And I thought about a man in a gas station uniform in 1994, borrowing against everything he owned to buy 1 pump and 1 cracked concrete lot on the edge of town. And I could not get that man to sit still next to the number she had just said out loud. I have spent 44 years learning to hold a number in my hands and know exactly what it means. A tolerance of 0.03. A shrink allowance of 1/8 inch to the foot. Numbers like that mean something you can check with a caliper, something that either fits or does not. $18,600,000 did not mean anything at all to me sitting in that chair. It was just a sound Imogene Falk had made with her mouth, and my chest had not caught up to it and would not catch up to it for days. Why me? I finally asked. 3 words. It was all I had. He left a letter that may answer that better than I can. She paused, the way she had paused on the phone before telling me he was gone. And I had already learned enough about her to know that pause meant something was coming that she did not want to soften and could not avoid. There's one more thing you should know before you read it. 9.2 million of that 18.6 is not new money. Mr. Quist, it's sitting in an account that has carried your name since March of 1996. I asked her to say that again. She did, word for word. Patient as a woman reading a gauge to a man who does not trust his own eyes. That account isn't part of what Mr. Brannock left you, she said. It's yours. It has been yours for 28 years. He simply never told you it existed. Now, I want you to understand what that did to a man who has spent his whole working life certain of 2 things: that iron does not lie, and that a fair day's wage was whatever got agreed on before the work started. I had never once, not one single day of my life, imagined there was a ledger running somewhere with my name at the top of it that I had never been shown. This isn't an inheritance, Imogene Falk said. And she let that pause sit even longer than the last one. Long enough that I heard the radiator ticking somewhere behind the wall. This is a repayment. I want to tell you I felt something grand in that moment. Gratitude, maybe, or wonder. What I actually felt was smaller and colder than that, and it took me a long while afterward to understand what it was. It was the feeling of a man being told that a debt he never knew he was owed had been quietly compounding for 28 years, while he slept in a room behind somebody else's garage and counted $200 on a stranger's staircase. She slid a box across the desk to me. Wood. Dovetailed at the corners. The kind of joint you cut by hand or you do not cut at all. And burned into the lid in Ovid's own blocky printing was my name, Delmar. Just that. Not Mr. Quist. Not even Delmar Quist. The one word he had always called me, going back to a break room in 1982, when we were both 27 years old and arguing about the right way to torque a manifold bolt. Neither one of us willing to give an inch. Both of us grinning the whole time we argued. I did not open it there in her office. I could not have. My hands were not steady enough for hinges that small. Take your time with it, Imogene Falk said. And for the first time that afternoon, Her voice lost its lawyer's edge entirely. "There's no rush on any of this. Whatever you decide, decide it slow." I carried that box out of her office under one arm, and the 4 months of unopened mail still weighing down my coat pocket on the other side. And I stood on the sidewalk on the west side of the square, not knowing which weight to set down first. There is a bench on the boulevard, right where the median splits Sandusky Avenue in two. Cast iron legs and slats gone silver with age. And I sat down on it, because my legs had simply stopped being willing to carry the two of them any farther. The box went on my lap. The mail went beside me on the slats. I do not know how long I sat there before I reached for the mail instead of the box. I have thought about that since. Why I chose the lighter weight first, when the heavier one was the one that mattered. And I believe now it was because some part of me already understood that once I opened that box, there would be no putting anything back the way it had been. So I started with the catalogs. Threw 2 of them straight in the trash can bolted to the end of the bench without opening them. A card from the VFW post asking about dues. 3 pieces of nothing at all, and then, near the bottom of the stack, an envelope with a return address I knew before I'd finished reading it. Brannock Pattern Works. It was postmarked the 25th of October, 4 days before he passed. My hands were not steady when I opened it, and inside was a single card, the kind with nothing printed on the front, just cream stock, and in Ovid's blocky hand it said, "Service will be held graveside, Fairview Cemetery, Saturday the 2nd, 11 o'clock. Family only, but Dell, you're the only family I've got left that counts. Come if you're able." I looked up at the date on my own phone. It was the 14th. The service had been held 12 days before that card ever reached my hand, because the man who was supposed to carry it in off the porch had carried it somewhere else instead, and left it to sit in a drawer, or a box, or wherever 4 months of another man's mail sits when nobody has any use for it. I did not cry on that bench. I want to tell you I did, because it would make for a better story. The old man weeping in public over his lost friend. But that is not what happened. What happened is something colder and worse, and I am only going to describe it once, because I do not have the words to make it sound like anything but what it was. I went very still. The kind of still a shop goes when the last machine shuts down for the night, and you realize you are the only one left in the building. A city bus went by on Sandusky Avenue, close enough that I felt the wind off it against my face, and I did not turn my head to watch it pass. Somewhere down the block, a door chime went off. Faint, tinny, the kind a hardware store hangs over its entrance. And it rang twice, and then it did not ring again. The cold had gotten into the iron slats under me by then, straight through my coat. The particular cold of metal that has been sitting in November shade all day, and I let it sit there against the backs of my legs without shifting my weight off it. Somewhere in that stillness, I noticed the cream-colored card was still in my hand, and that my thumb had been running back and forth along its edge, over and over. The same motion I used to feel for a burr on a freshly sanded pattern before I will call the surface finished. I made myself stop. I set the card down flat on my knee, and I put both hands over it. And I sat that way, not moving, until a streetlight 2 poles down clicked on early against the gray. I sat on that bench with the graveside invitation 12 days too late in one hand, and I looked at nothing in particular across the median. And somewhere behind my ribs, a door that had been open a crack for 2 years closed the rest of the way. Quiet, the way a good hinge closes. I had missed it. Whatever else came after, whatever number Imogene Falk had said inside that office, None of it changed the fact that I had not been there to stand at the edge of a hole in the ground while they lowered Ovid Brannock into it. And nobody else on this earth had thought to make sure I knew. I sat there a long while. Long enough that the light started going that early winter gray it gets by 4 in the afternoon, and my hip had gone stiff on the iron slats. And I understood I could either sit there until dark, or I could go back and finish what I'd started. I went back. Imogene Falk was still at her desk when I came through the door the second time that day. And if she was surprised to see me, she did not let it show. She had a way about her, I would learn, of never showing you more than the situation called for. "I'm ready," I told her, though I do not believe either one of us thought that was entirely true. "For the box," she nodded once, and reached into the bottom drawer and set it in front of me a second time. Dovetailed corners. My name burned into the lid in blocky letters. I sat down across from her, and this time I did not hesitate over the latch. The lid came up on well-fitted hinges, no squeak in them at all, and I remember being glad of that in a small, useless way. The way you are glad of a good joint, even when your whole world is coming apart around it. On top lay a letter, 4 pages, written on the backs of Brannock Pattern Works job tickets, the kind with the company letterhead running across the top, and a grid of little boxes below it for hours and material. Ovid had turned every one of them over and filled the blank side with his own square, deliberate hand. "Dell, if you're reading this, I've run out of time to say it to your face, which is exactly the kind of thing I always told myself I still had time for. You pulled me out of a car in a ditch on Route 9 in February of 1987. You've spent 38 years calling that being in the right place at the right time. I've spent the same 38 years calling it the reason I still have a life to have spent. We are never going to agree on that, and I have made my peace with it. In March of '96, you worked out the parting line on the vibration coupling that saved this shop 7% on scrap. And you told me, and I quote you exactly, I only did the wood part. Ove, that patent has both our names on the filing. Nobody outside this office ever knew that but me and a lawyer in Mansfield, because you would not let me put your name on the door. And I let you win that argument, because I did not know yet how to make you understand what I owed you. So I opened an account instead. Half of every royalty check, straight into it, since the day the patent cleared. I told myself I would give it to you when you asked. I want you to know I tried to tell you twice. The first time you waved it off before I got 3 words out. The second time was the day we buried Marit. And I looked at your face at that graveside, and I understood there was no version of that day where I could add one more weight to what you were already carrying. There was a third time you never knew about at all. I'll let that one stay mine. You never asked, Dell. 28 years, and you never once asked what became of that idea, or that money, or whether I'd ever made good on what I owed you. I have sat with that a long while, trying to decide if it was the finest thing about you, or the thing I'd most like to shake you by the shoulders over. I have decided it is both, and I no longer see much daylight between the two. I am tired, and the doctors are not lying to me about why, and so I am doing now what I should have done years ago, and simply putting it in writing where you cannot wave it off. It was never mine to give you, Dell. It was already yours. I only kept it safe until you were ready to come and get it. Your friend, Ovid. I set the letter down on the desk, and I did not trust myself to pick it back up right away. Underneath it lay a ledger, bound in green cloth, every page filled with the same square hand, a running column of dates and figures going back to 1996. Underneath that, A photograph. The two of us in the break room the year we met. 27 years old. Both of us laughing at something the camera never caught. I remember that afternoon better than I remember whole years since. Somebody's radio was going in the corner, and Ovid had grease up past his wrist from a water pump he'd been fighting all shift. And he was telling me I had the manifold torque wrong, dead wrong, and I was telling him the same thing right back. Neither one of us was going to give an inch. I do not remember who took the picture. I do not remember who turned out to be right about the bolt either, though I suspect it was him, and I suspect I never told him so. A shrink rule. The long kind that reads longer than a true foot to account for how iron pulls in as it cools. With the initials D.Q. stamped into the brass at one end. I had one just like it once. Lost it somewhere in a move 20 years back, and never told a soul I missed it. And at the bottom of it all, wrapped in a shop rag gone soft with age, a pattern, painted black, a vibration coupling, the shape of it still familiar to my hands, even though I had not touched one in 8 years. I picked it up. I turned it over in my hands, the way you turn over any piece of work you are checking for flaws, feeling the grain under my thumb, the old lacquer gone matte with handling. I did not turn it over to look at the underside. I want to be honest with you about why, because I have had a long while to think on it since. Some part of me already understood that if I turned that pattern face down, I would see something I had spent 45 years arranging my whole life to avoid seeing. So I set it down, face up, on the edge of Imogene Falk's desk, and I looked at the letter instead, at one line in particular, until the words went soft and swam a little in front of me. You never asked, Dell. 28 years, and you never once asked. There was a knock at the sample room door around 9 that night. Soft, almost apologetic. And I opened it to find Marguerite Dietz standing on the landing, with a leash in one hand and an old dog sitting patient at her feet. I knew Margot Dietz by reputation before I ever knew her by face. 16 years running the floor at Brannock Pattern Works, and Ovid used to say she kept that shop straighter than he ever managed to keep himself. She looked tired that night. The particular tired of a person who has spent the day doing one more hard thing on top of a week already full of them. His name is Rule, she said, before I'd even asked. Ovid's instructions were specific, said the dog would know where he belonged, and I wasn't to second-guess him about it. The dog looked up at me. English setter, gray through the muzzle. One ear that stood, and one that had given up trying years ago. He did not bark. He did not wag. He just looked. Steady. The way you look at something you are still deciding about. He's deaf, Margot said. Has been 2 years now. Ovid taught him hand signs. I can show you the ones I know, if you want them. I did want them. I did not say so right away, because my voice was not entirely trustworthy that evening. But I nodded, and Margot ran through 4 signs standing right there on the landing. Flat palm down for sit. 2 fingers pointed for stay. A closed fist tapped once against her own chest for a word I understood without her needing to translate it. Come here. Ovid named him Rule, she told me, because a man ought to keep hold of at least one. I did not laugh at that. I wanted to. It sounded exactly like something Ovid would say, dry as sawdust, and not offer up any explanation beyond it. I crouched down slow, on account of my knee, and offered Rule the back of my hand, the way you do with a strange dog. He leaned his head into it instead of sniffing, the whole weight of it, like the checking had already been done somewhere I wasn't privy to. Up close his muzzle had gone almost entirely silver, and there was a scar through one eyebrow, old and healed smooth, that Margot did not offer an explanation for, and I did not ask about. He rides in the truck bed of every delivery route Ovid ever ran the last 6 years, she said, watching the two of us. Sat up front with him at the counter most days. Customers used to ask if he was for sale. Ovid always told them the same thing. Not this one. She handed me the leash and a sack of food and a folded blanket that smelled like cedar shavings. And she stood there a moment longer than the errand required, the way people do when there is something else they came to say and have not yet worked around to it. He asked after you, she finally said. Near the end. Wanted to know if you'd gotten in touch. I told her I had not known there was anything to get in touch about. I know that now, she said. And there was something careful in the way she said it, something that told me she knew more than she was saying and had decided this was not the night to say the rest of it. I'll let you get settled. She went back down the stairs, and Rule and I stood in the doorway looking at each other. And then, without any sign from me at all, he walked past me into the room and lay down in the corner nearest the window, in the exact spot where the streetlight came through, and put his chin on his paws. And that was that. He had decided. I sat down on the edge of the bed with the box still open beside me. The letter, the ledger, the photograph, the shrink rule, and the pattern lying face up where I'd left it. I did not read the letter again. I did not need to. Some sentences you only have to read once for them to take up permanent residence. I picked up the pattern one more time before I turned in, held it a long while under the lamp, the black paint gone dull and soft with 40 years of handling before it ever reached me. The grain of the pine still visible underneath where the light caught it right. My thumb found the edge of it. Same motion as always, checking for a burr that was not there. I set it face up on the windowsill, next to my father's broken gauge, the two halves lying where I'd left them since Friday night. Then I turned off the lamp and lay down in my coat again, because some habits from that first night had already decided to stay a while longer than I meant them to. In the dark, I heard Rule's tail move against the floorboards once, twice, a slow, deliberate arc, and go still. I do not know what he heard, or thought he heard, being deaf as he was, but something in that room had settled for him, the same way it does for a man when he finally sets down a weight he has been carrying since Friday. I was not alone in that room. That was the whole of what I let myself think, lying there in the dark. And it was enough to get me to sleep. Sunday morning, I woke to Rule's nose against my hand, and a knock at the door downstairs that Ludi must have answered, because a minute later her voice came up the stairwell. Careful. Delmar, you've got company. I came down in my stocking feet, not having thought to find my shoes first. And Delphine was standing on the landing, holding a cake tin with both hands, the way you carry something you are not entirely sure you are welcome to be carrying. She had on the same gray cardigan from Friday night. Her hair was pulled back tight, the way she wears it when she has not slept well and does not want anyone asking about it. Her car sat running at the curb outside, headlights still on in the gray morning light, though the sun had been up 2 hours, and I remember thinking that was not like her. Delphine has never once in her life left a car running longer than it needed to be. I made Mom's coffee cake, she said. The one with the streusel. I want to tell you what went through me standing on that landing, because it was not simple. Some part of me, some old, worn-down part that had been her father for 45 years before it was anything else, wanted very badly to take that tin and forgive the whole of it on the spot. 15 months of a back room and a leak that never got fixed, and a chair nobody pulled out for me. Gone. Just like that. over a coffee cake. "Thank you," I said, and took it from her. "About Friday." She looked past my shoulder at the stairs, not at me. It wasn't handled right. I'm sorry. Not handled right. Not, I'm sorry I let him do that. Not, I should have stood in that doorway and told him no. 15 months I had waited for a sentence with a spine in it. And what I got instead was a sentence with no one holding it responsible for anything at all. Floating there between us, like it had happened to nobody. Her phone rang before I could answer that. She looked at the screen, and her whole posture changed. The way a plank changes when you finally get a clamp on it. "It's Kip," she said, and answered it right there on the landing. I could hear both sides of it, the stairwell being what it was. His voice came through tinny and quick. "Is he there? Good. Good. Hey, put him on a second, would you?" She handed me the phone before I'd decided whether I wanted it. "Del, listen. I just wanted to say, we're thinking about you." A pause, and in that pause I heard him breathing, the particular sound of a man working up to something. "So, hey, did the lawyer happen to say anything yet? About what he left you? Ballpark, even?" 4 seconds. His question about how I was doing. 40. His question about the money. I did not need a stopwatch to know the ratio of that. I have spent a career timing operations down to the 10th of a second, and some habits do not switch off just because the machine you are timing is a man's voice on a telephone. "I'm fine, Kip," I said, which answered neither question, and I handed the phone back to Delphine. She said something quick into it, something I did not catch, and hung up, and stood there on the landing with her coat still buttoned to the collar, like she had not decided whether she was staying. "I should get back," she said. "Nell has a game." I told her that was fine. I told her thank you again for the cake. She left the way she'd come, quick, apologetic, the car pulling away from the curb before I'd even gotten the sample room door shut behind me. I set the tin down on the little table by the window, and I peeled back the foil. Slow. The way you'd unwrap something you already half suspected was not what it claimed to be. Steam had fogged the underside of the foil a little, still warm, which struck me even then as a strange kind of care to have taken over a thing that was about to disappoint me. And underneath, sitting in the bottom of the tin, where nobody would think to look unless they were the kind of man who spent his life checking the underside of things, was a sticker. Kroger Bakery. $11.49. My wife's recipe called for real butter, no shortening, and a full teaspoon of nutmeg, freshly grated, not the kind that comes pre-ground in a jar. Delphine had helped her make it 100 times growing up, standing on a step stool at 8 years old, grating that nutmeg herself because Marit said a child ought to have one job in the kitchen that was entirely hers. She would have known that recipe cold. She could have made it in her sleep. She had not made this cake. She had bought it, on the way over, still warm from somebody else's oven, and driven it across town wrapped in foil to look like a thing it was not. I sat with that a long while, Rule's head resting heavy across my feet. And I understood something that morning I had not let myself understand the night before, holding Ovid's letter. They already knew. Whatever the number was, however Imogene Falk had come to say it out loud to me first, somehow it had reached my daughter's house before it had ever fully reached me. Margot called Tuesday morning and asked would I come by the shop, see about the accounts. Nothing urgent, whenever suited me. I told her 11 would suit me fine, and I hung up the phone and stood in the sample room a good while before I could make myself put my coat on. I had not set foot in a pattern shop in 8 years. I want you to understand what that smell does to a man who spent 44 years inside it. Shellac and birch dust and machine oil. and under all of it, something like sawdust gone slightly sweet with age. And the second that door opened on Southern Avenue, it went straight through me, like nothing had touched me since Merritt's funeral. Margot met me at the door and walked me through herself. 4 young hands on the floor that morning, none of them older than 30, and Rule trotted straight to a spot under the layout bench like he'd slept there his whole life instead of 1 week. I stood just inside the door a moment before I could make my feet go any further. The light came in high and slanted through the clear-story windows the way it always had, catching the sawdust hanging in the air, and somewhere toward the back, a bandsaw was running. That particular low whine I could have picked out of 100 other sounds blindfolded. A radio was playing low near the finishing bench, some station out of Mansfield, and under it all was the ticking of the big shop clock that had hung over the same doorway since before I ever started there. Nothing about it had changed. That was the part that nearly took my knees out from under me. 8 years, and it had simply gone on being exactly itself without me. The walls were hung with patterns, rack after rack of them, and Margot called out names as we passed, like she was introducing me at a reunion. "That's the Halverson mold," she said, pointing. "Right beside it, the Prigatano bracket." Further down, 3 patterns in a row, she called, without missing a beat. "The Quist series." I heard my own name spoken 3 separate times walking that floor, and each time I did not know what to do with my face. "You still know your way around one of these?" Margot asked, handing me a gouge off the bench. My hand knew before my head did. It settled into the old grip without asking permission, thumb along the handle exactly where 44 years had worn a shallow groove into the wood. And for one long moment, I was not a man standing in another man's shop deciding what to do with somebody's fortune. I was just a pair of hands that remembered their work. "You ever think about coming back?" she asked. Not pushing, just asking, the way you ask a man a question you already suspect you know the answer to. "That's not mine to come back to," I said. "It's yours to run. Was Ovid's to leave you running it. He left it to you. Delmar. He left me a number. That's different from a shop." Margot did not argue that. She just watched me a moment, the way Ovid used to watch a piece before he decided whether it was worth keeping. And then she walked me toward the back, past the cure racks, and told me something I had not been expecting that morning at all. "There's a thing I never told anybody," she said. "September, before he got too sick to travel, he had me drive him somewhere. Wouldn't say where until we got there. Turned out to be a street over in Poplar Heights. I stopped walking. He had me park across from a brick house. Sat there 15 minutes, just looking at it. Didn't say a word the whole time. Then he told me to drive him home." "Which house?" I said, though I already knew. Didn't get the number. But it was the 19th of September. I remember because it was my daughter's birthday. Underd told him I needed to be home by 6. The 19th of September. I did not need to check a calendar for that date. That was the week Kip had come to me about the leak in the kitchen room. The week I had carried my things down to the space behind the garage and told myself it was only temporary, only until they got around to the repair. Ovid had been sitting outside that house while I was inside it, being quietly moved into a smaller and smaller corner of my own daughter's home. And he had not once come to the door. "Why didn't he knock?" I asked, though I do not think I expected Margot to have the answer. She didn't. She just shook her head, slow, and said the only thing there was to say about a man who had spent his whole life being careful never to add weight to another man's load, even when the weight in question was the truth. I don't believe he knew how to knock on that particular door. Delmar. I don't believe he'd ever had the practice. We walked back through the shop in silence after that. past the racks, past my own name spoken in wood on 3 separate patterns. And near the door, propped against the wall where nobody had gotten around to hanging it yet, I saw a sign, new lettering, still smelling faintly of fresh paint. Brannock and Quist. I did not ask about it. Margot did not offer. We both understood, I think, that some things get said out loud before a man is ready for them. And this was not going to be one of the things I could carry that particular morning. Delphine called Thursday and asked if I would come for supper. Her voice had a different register to it than Sunday's had. Warmer, more careful. The kind of voice a person uses when they have rehearsed something and want it to sound like they have not. I went. I want you to understand why I went. Because I have had people ask me since. And the honest answer is not a flattering one. I went because some part of me, 70 years old and supposedly past being fooled, still wanted very badly for it to be true. The table was set with the white cloth, the one that only came out for Christmas and the year Nell was baptized. There was a candle burning that smelled artificially of apple, and a chair pulled out at the head of the table that I understood, without being told, was meant for me. I looked at that chair a moment longer than I meant to. It was the good chair, the one with arms, the one that used to sit at that same table's head every single Sunday I lived under that roof. And in 15 months, nobody had once pulled it out for me. I had eaten at the corner of that table, off to the side, more times than I could count, never minding or telling myself I did not mind. And here it was now, squared and centered and waiting, like it had never once sat empty. I did not say any of that. I sat down in it, the way you sit down in a chair that has finally remembered your name. And I did not trust the feeling. And I was right not to. Kip greeted me at the door with a handshake that went on a half-second longer than a handshake needs to. "Dell," he said. First time in 15 months he'd called me that instead of nothing at all. Or worse, something behind my back. "Good to see you, man. Real good." Nell was already at the table, 10 years old and unusually still for a girl who is rarely still about anything. She watched me sit down the way you watch weather coming, careful, unsure which direction it was going to break. Partway through the meal, before the plates had even been cleared, I excused myself to use the washroom, and instead of turning right toward the hall bath, I turned left, past the kitchen, out through the mudroom door, toward the garage. I want to tell you, I had a plan when I did it. I did not. My feet simply took me there, the same way they had taken me to Plymouth Street the Saturday before. Some old animal part of me needing to see the room for myself before I could sit back down at that table and eat another bite in peace. The door was not locked. It opened onto a space I did not recognize. Fresh paint on the walls, pale blue, still smelling faintly of it under the cold. A grab bar bolted into the wall beside where the bed used to sit, the kind you see screwed into the tile at a hospital. Steel, industrial, entirely out of place against a homemade quilt folded at the foot of a bed I had slept in for 15 months. And taped to the inside of the closet door, laminated in plastic so it would survive handling. A calendar. Care schedule, it said across the top, in Delphine's own careful handwriting. Morning, afternoon, evening, boxes for each. Checked and initialed going back 3 weeks. The ink in some boxes gone slightly blue-gray where the plastic lamination had caught moisture. One line, near the bottom, made my chest go tight in a way the cold had nothing to do with. Assist with orientation to time and place as needed. I read it twice, to be certain I was reading it right. And then I read the date at the top a third time. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of somebody filling in boxes on a form for a man who had, as far as I knew, done nothing in 3 weeks but grieve a friend and sign for a room above an upholstery shop. I stood in that doorway a long while. Rule's absence beside me suddenly very loud. Because I had left him back at the sample room and had never once, until that moment, wished harder for a dog. They had not fixed this room up to welcome me back into it. They had staged it, dressed it for a performance I had not yet been told I was going to be asked to give. For an audience I could not yet name. I did not say a word about it. I want you to understand that too, because I know what you might be thinking I should have done. Storming back to that table and demanding an explanation. I have never once in my life been a man who does his best thinking in the middle of a room full of people watching him. I closed the door the way I'd found it, and I walked back through the mudroom. And I sat back down at that table. And I finished my supper. Then I reached into my coat pocket, where I had been carrying it since Friday night without quite knowing why. And I set both halves of my father's broken marking gauge down on the white tablecloth, next to the candle, in plain sight of everyone at that table. Nobody asked what it was. For 10 full minutes, that meal went on around it. Forks and knives, and Kip talking about the Bengals' chances this season. And that broken gauge sat there between the candle and the breadbasket the whole time, saying the one thing I could not yet make myself say out loud. Under the table. I felt a small hand find 2 of my fingers and hold on. Supper ended the way these things end, when nobody at the table wants to be the one who calls it. Plates cleared, coffee poured and mostly untouched. Kip talking a while longer about nothing in particular, until even he seemed to hear how much room the silence was taking up around his words. Nell asked if she could show me something outside before I left. Delphine started to say it was cold, and Nell was already halfway to the door in her socks. No shoes. Breath already showing white the second she crossed the threshold. And I followed her because some things a grandfather does not weigh the wisdom of. He just goes. She led me around to the back step, out of the light thrown by the kitchen window, and she held out her hand. In it was a disc of wood, cut clean through a branch, and she had counted the rings with a marker, small numbers penciled faint beside each one. 31, she said. I counted twice. I told her that was very fine counting. She did not smile at that the way she usually would have. She stood there in the cold, in her sock feet, breath coming quick. And I understood I was about to be told something she had been carrying around for longer than one evening. Dad goes in your room sometimes, she said. When you're not here. I asked her what he did in there. I don't know. He told me not to say anything. She looked down at the wood disc in her hands, turning it over. He said I shouldn't tell Mom either. I want you to sit with that a moment, the way I had to sit with it, out on that step. Because a 9-year-old keeping a secret from her own mother at her father's instruction is not a small thing. It is the kind of thing that tells you exactly how far gone a situation already is, long before any adult in the house is willing to say it plain. Grandpa. Her voice had gone smaller. Are you gonna forget me? The question landed somewhere under my ribs and stayed there. Dad said, he said you're gonna start forgetting things. Forgetting people, even. She was not crying. Not yet. But she had the particular stillness of a child working very hard not to. She was still holding that wood disc, turning it over and over between her small fingers, the way a person handles something when they need their hands to be doing anything at all. He said I should get used to it now, so it doesn't hurt so bad later. I have stood in front of men twice my size in that shop, and never once felt my hands shake the way they shook right then, out on that cold step. Hearing a 9-year-old repeat back to me, word for word, I am certain, exactly the story her father intended everyone in that house to believe about me, before I had ever shown a single sign of it. There is a thing I understood in that moment that I am not going to say to you the way I understood it, plain and cold, standing there in my socks, same as her. It was not that Kip believed I was losing my mind. I do not think he believed that at all. It was that he needed other people to believe it. And a 9-year-old girl who loved me made for the softest possible place to plant that belief and let it take root on its own. I told her I was not going to forget her. I told her that as plain and as steady as I have ever said anything in my life, because it was the one thing in that whole conversation I knew for certain to be true. She nodded, the way children nod when they want very badly to believe something and have decided, for the moment, that they do. Through the kitchen window behind her, I could see Delphine at the stove, back to us, stirring a pot that did not need stirring. And I understood, watching her shoulders, that whatever she was writing in that blue notebook of hers, she was writing it in good faith. She believed every word of it. That thought did not comfort me. It frightened me a great deal more than if she had been lying. I walked Nell back inside, and I told Delphine I had better get going before the roads iced over. And I did not say another word about any of it that night. But I did not sleep. Back in the sample room, with Rule's head heavy across my feet and my father's broken gauge sitting useless on the sill. Somewhere close to 11, I picked up my phone. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I called somebody instead of waiting for them to call me. Imogen Falk answered on the second ring, which told me something about the kind of hours a woman in her line of work keeps. Mr. Quist, is everything all right? No, I said. I don't believe it is. I think it's time we talked about setting a trap. Imogen Falk's office at 8 in the morning had a different light to it than it had the first time I sat in that chair. No primer gray this time, just plain, flat daylight. The kind that does not leave anywhere for a thing to hide. Before we talk about traps, she said, I need you to see something first. She turned a folder around on the desk and slid it toward me. And I want to tell you that I have looked at a great many documents in my life. Work orders and patent filings and the fine print on more machinery contracts than I could count. And none of them ever hit me the way that folder did. A petition, filed with the Crawford County Probate Court. Petition for guardianship of an incapacitated person, filed by Delphine Quist Harmon. I looked at the date stamped in the corner, and I made myself read it twice, because the first time through, my mind simply refused the arithmetic. 9 days before the cake tin. I sat very still with that folder open in front of me, doing the same arithmetic 3 more times in my head, hoping each time it would come out differently. It did not. 9 days meant that while Delphine was standing in a courthouse hallway, swearing an oath about my mind, I had still been sleeping in a stranger's room above an upholstery shop. Still grateful. Still telling myself the worst of it was already behind me. 9 days meant the petition had been filed before Ovid's name had even come up between us. This had nothing to do with the money. Not at the start of it. Whatever had put that pen in my daughter's hand 9 days before any of us knew what I was worth, it had been building a long while before that. Quiet. The way rot builds in a beam nobody thinks to check, because the floor still feels solid enough to walk on. 9 days before the cake tin. 9 days before my daughter stood on that landing with a bakery cake dressed up in foil, apologizing for Friday night in a sentence with no spine in it. She had already walked into a courthouse and sworn out a petition, declaring her own father incompetent to manage his affairs. There's more, Imogen said, and her voice had none of its usual careful distance in it that morning. 4 supporting statements from Dr. Corbin Hutto, dated across the last 5 months, documented concerns about memory, disorientation, wandering. I've never been a patient of Dr. Hutto's in my life, I said. He's Delphine's family physician. The concerns were reported by her. As a family member observing you. That's permitted, under the statute. It doesn't require your presence. I sat with that a long while. Somewhere in the last 5 months, while I was sleeping in a room behind a garage and being called a live-in handyman on the phone, my own daughter had been walking into a doctor's office 4 separate times to build a paper trail proving I was disappearing, 1 appointment at a time, without me ever once being in the room to say otherwise. The blue notebook. I understood, sitting there, exactly what it had been for the whole time. What's my position? I asked. Legally, right now, precarious. A home evaluation has already been scheduled. If it goes forward and the court finds in their favor, guardianship transfers your financial decision-making to Delphine, with Kip as co-guardian. She let that sit a moment before she went on. Ohio is a one-party consent state, Mr. Quist, which means you can record a conversation you're part of without telling the other person, and it will hold up in court. She reached into her desk drawer and set a small silver recorder in front of me, no larger than a pack of matches. I know what I'm asking, she said. I'm asking you to go back into that house and let them believe they're succeeding, long enough to prove, in their own words, exactly what they're doing. I picked up the recorder. It sat light in my palm, lighter than a single chisel, and yet it felt like the heaviest thing anyone had handed me since a wooden box with my name burned into the lid. I turned it over once, the way I turn over any new tool before I trust it, checking the weight of it, the balance. And I thought, not for the first time that morning, that my whole life had trained me for exactly this kind of instrument and no other. A thing you hold quiet in your hand and trust to record the truth of a thing more faithfully than anybody's memory of it afterward. There's a date already, I said. It was not a question. The home evaluation is set. I don't have the exact day yet. Soon. I sat with the recorder in my hand, and I thought about a girl in her socks on a cold back step, asking me if I was going to forget her, because her father had told her to get used to it now, so it would not hurt so bad later. I thought about a bed with a grab bar screwed into the wall beside it, for a man who did not yet need one. I thought about 15 months of a room getting smaller, and a chair nobody pulled out, and a coffee cake with a Kroger sticker hidden in the bottom of the tin. And I understood, sitting in that flat morning light, that every one of those small humiliations had simply been groundwork, laid one careless brick at a time, for exactly this. Mr. Quist, Imogene said quiet. What do you want to do? I have spent my whole life being good at exactly one thing. And it is not the thing most men would name first if you ask them what they were good at. I'm good at one thing, I told her. Being in a room without anybody noticing I'm there. I put the recorder in my coat pocket, next to my father's broken gauge, and I went home to play the grateful man. I moved back into that room behind the garage on a Tuesday, and Kip carried my suitcase up the walk himself. One hand under my elbow the whole way, like I might go down on the ice at any moment, though the walk had been salted clean. We're glad to have you back, Del, he said, and I let him say it, and I did not correct the man on a single word of it, because Imogene Falk had asked me to be, for a while, exactly the kind of grateful that made a person careless. I want to tell you what that cost me, playing that part, because I do not believe I have ever worked harder at anything in my life. Not even the hardest years on the shop floor. 44 years I had made a living out of getting the smallest details exactly right. And now I was spending every waking hour getting them exactly wrong on purpose. Thanking Kip for a ride he did not need to give me. Letting Delphine fuss over whether I'd eaten enough. Nodding along to whatever small kindness came my way. And swallowing down the part of me that wanted to ask, out loud, in front of both of them, why none of this had been available to me 9 days before a courthouse clerk stamped a date on a piece of paper. The room had the fresh paint smell still faintly under everything else. The grab bar was right where I'd left it. Somebody had made the bed with clean sheets and folded down one corner the way you would for a hotel guest. And I stood there a moment, taking that in. A bed dressed for a stranger who was supposed to believe he was home. I turned the recorder on that first night, sitting on the edge of that bed, and I said into it, quiet, the date and the time, the way Imogene had told me to, so that whatever came after would have a clean beginning nobody could argue with later. Supper that first week was pleasant in a way that made my skin crawl a little more each night. Kip asked after my knee. Delphine cooked things Marit used to make. Real ones this time, not bakery ones. And some nights I could almost forget what I was sitting at that table to do. Almost. 3 nights in. I woke at 2 a.m. with a headache pressing in behind my left eye. The kind that starts dull and climbs by degrees until it has your whole skull in a vice. I lay there a long while in the dark, waiting for it to ease. And it occurred to me, somewhere in that waiting, that I had been waking with that same headache most mornings for close to 10 weeks now, going all the way back to before Ovid ever passed. And I had simply been telling myself it was age, or grief, or bad sleep on a stranger's mattress. I got up to find the space heater dial, thinking I might turn it down. And that was when I noticed the carbon monoxide alarm on the wall by the door. The plastic cover slightly askew, like somebody had opened it and not quite seated it back the way it came. I stood in front of it a moment before I touched it. There is a particular kind of looking a pattern maker does before he ever picks up a tool. Walking the whole shape of a thing with his eyes first. Checking for anything that sits a hair off true. And I did that now, standing in my socks in the middle of the night, running my eyes over that little plastic housing the way I would run them over a casting straight out of the sand. I took the cover off. No battery inside, not missing. Not dead and rolled under the dresser where a man might drop one by accident. The compartment was clean, dry, the little copper contacts inside showing no corrosion at all. The kind of clean that only comes from a battery being lifted out on purpose and the cover snapped shut again by careful hands. I stood there a long moment in the dark with that empty plastic housing in my hand, my head still pounding, and I thought about all the small, unremarkable things that had happened to me in that house over 15 months, each one small enough on its own to excuse. And I understood, finally, that I had been looking at each one alone, instead of laying them end to end, the way you lay out a pattern before you cut it, and seeing the whole shape of the thing at once. I did not put a battery in. I want you to understand that decision, because I have turned it over many times since, and I still believe it was right. Imogene had told me, plain, that proof mattered more than comfort. And a working alarm in that room would only tell me what I already suspected. What I needed was for it to keep failing to do its job, quietly, on the record, until somebody with the right instruments could tell me exactly how badly. Instead, I reached into my suitcase, into a lining I had picked out myself for exactly this purpose. And I set a small black data logger on the shelf behind a stack of folded shirts, no bigger than a matchbook. the kind Imogene's investigator had shown me how to use, with 3 simple buttons and nothing else to give it away. I closed the closet door on it and went back to bed. And I lay there in the dark, with my head still pounding, listening. Somewhere out past the garage wall, close to 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the gravel. Slow, careful, circling once and then going still. I did not get up to look. Some things a man is better off not seeing, until he has proof enough that seeing it will matter. Kip laid the papers out on the kitchen table on a Thursday morning, like a man laying out a map, squaring the corners, smoothing the top sheet flat with the side of his hand. Small yellow tabs already stuck along the margin, marking every place he needed my signature. 14 pages. I counted them twice while he poured the coffee, the way I count anything that is about to ask something of me. The kitchen smelled of burnt coffee grounds, the pot left too long on the warmer, and I noticed a legal pad off to one side with a sample signature practiced on it 4 or 5 times over. Delmar A. Quist, written out in a hand that was trying very hard to imitate mine, and not quite managing the way I looped the Q. Durable power of attorney, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. Easy, like we were discussing the weather. Unlimited, financial, medical, all of it. Just makes things simpler. Del, if anything ever happens fast, you don't want Delphine scrambling through some hospital red tape trying to prove she's allowed to make a call for you. I turned to page 9 and I asked him a single question. What's on this page? He did not answer right away. His eyes went to the page, then to me, then back to the page. The way a man looks at something he signed off on without ever quite reading it himself. It's standard language, he said. Boilerplate. What's the boilerplate say? Kip? I watched him work at it. Watched the muscles along his jaw shift while he searched for something that sounded like an answer and was not one. And I understood in that silence something I had not fully understood before that morning. This document had not been written for me to read closely. It had been written for me to sign quickly. And Kip himself did not know what half of it said, because knowing had never been the point of it for him. Getting it signed was the point. I heard tires on gravel outside just then, and Kip glanced toward the window in a way that told me he had been listening for it. I need some time with this, I said. And I folded the 14 pages closed, careful, the way you close a book you intend to come back to. Something shifted in his face. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to fear, quick and gone almost as soon as it surfaced, and I have thought about that look a great deal since, because it did not fit the man I had spent 15 months believing I understood. Del, I'm trying to help you here, he said, and his voice had dropped, lost some of its salesman's polish. I'm trying to save you from yourself. There's not a lot of time on this. That night, alone in the room behind the garage, I plugged in the recorder and let it run back what it had caught from earlier, out past the wall, faint but clear enough. I sat on the edge of that bed with one earbud in, the way Imogene's investigator had shown me, and I listened to 15 minutes of nothing much at all. Kip's boots on gravel, a truck door, the ordinary sounds of a man doing ordinary things in his own driveway. I nearly stopped it there. I am glad, now, that I did not. Kip's voice, low, careful, talking to somebody I never heard answer. Not the easy salesman's cadence he used at that kitchen table that morning. Something tighter, something that had all the polish stripped off it. A string of numbers, read out slow, the way you read out an account. Then 2 words that made the whole shape of the last 15 months finally come into focus. Foreclosure date. I played that section back 3 times, my thumb finding the same worn spot on the recorder's edge each time. The way I would run a thumb along a burr I could not quite believe was there. There was no mistaking it. A date. Mid-January, said the way a man says a date he has been carrying around in his chest for months. Turning it over at 3 a.m, the same way I had once turned over a broken marking gauge. And then, quieter than anything else he said that whole recording. Quiet enough that I had to run it back twice to be certain I had heard it right. Just get me to January. Please. Please. I sat with that word a long while. I had never once, in 15 months under that roof, heard Kip Merrow say please to another living soul. Not to Delphine, not to Nell, not to me. It came out of him in that recording, sounding like something scraped up from the very bottom of a man. The kind of please a person only spends when he has run entirely out of other currency. I sat with that a long while. Not anger, not right away. Something closer to understanding, cold and unwelcome, the kind that does not excuse a man, but does explain him. Kip was not simply greedy. Kip was drowning, and somewhere along the way, he had decided that the fastest route to shore ran directly through an old man's inheritance. And he had built an entire performance of hospitality around getting there before anyone noticed the water was already at his chin. I did not feel sorry for him. I want that understood plainly. But I no longer believed, lying there in the dark with that recording finished, that I was dealing with a man who thought he was doing something wrong. 3 a.m, and I could not sleep for the ache behind my eyes. So I gave up trying and sat instead in the one chair the sample room offered, with Rule's head resting warm against my foot and the first real snow of the season starting to come down soft outside the window. The pattern was still sitting where I had left it, face up on the sill, next to my father's 2 broken halves of a marking gauge. I had not touched it in weeks. I had gotten very good, since that first night, at simply not looking directly at it. The way you get good at not looking at anything you have decided you are not yet ready to see. That night, for reasons I cannot entirely account for, my mind went back to 1979. I had asked to have my name put on a job ticket. Once. The only time in my whole working life I ever asked for such a thing. I was 33 years old, proud of a coupling housing I had spent 3 weeks getting exactly right. And I went to the foreman and I asked, plain as anything, if my name could go on the ticket alongside the part number, the way some of the older men's names sometimes did on a piece they were known for. He said, sure, Dell. Didn't see the harm in it. 6 weeks later, a break housing cracked out on a job site. Cyril Boy lost his left hand at the wrist. My name was on the ticket. Not because I had built the part that failed. I hadn't. The investigation cleared me completely. Found the fault in the alloy itself. A bad batch from a supplier 3 states over. Nothing any pattern maker on earth could have caught by eye. I was innocent of it, plain and simple. Every honest measure of the word. But I stood in that foreman's office and watched him read my name off an accident report. Out loud. To a room full of men. And something in me closed that day, the way a hand closes around a burn. I decided, right there, that I would never again put myself in a position where my name could be read out loud over somebody else's suffering, whether I had earned the blame or not. 45 years. I kept that decision. I told myself it was humility. I told myself it was simply not needing the credit. I have sat with that story a great many times since, turning it the way you turn a casting looking for the flaw. And I no longer believe humility was ever the whole of it. Some part of it, the larger part if I am honest, was fear. dressed up for so long in modesty's clothes that I had stopped being able to tell the two of them apart. I picked up the pattern. My hands knew what they were about to do before the rest of me had agreed to it. The way hands sometimes do after 44 years of practice. I turned it over. D. Quist, 1996. Stamped deep into the wood. The letters sharp-edged even now. Cut by a man who had known exactly what he was doing, and had done it anyway. In secret. And waited 28 years for me to be the one to find it. I did not move for a long while after that. The radiator ticked once in the corner and went quiet. Snow kept coming down past the window. No wind behind it. Straight down. The kind that piles instead of drifts. Somewhere below, in the closed shop, a sewing machine motor Ludi must have left running idle clicked off on its own timer, and the whole building seemed to settle a half-inch on its foundation, the way old buildings do in the deep cold. Rule's ear twitched once at the sound and did not lift. I sat there with the pattern face down across both knees, my thumb resting flat against the carved letters without moving. And for a long while, that was the entire of what I did. I do not know how long. Long enough that the snow outside had laid down a fresh half-inch on the windowsill. Long enough that Rule shifted once against my foot and settled again. Long enough that whatever was left of the old ache behind my eyes gave way to something with no name I know of. Something that sat in my chest, heavier than grief and lighter than relief. Some third thing that had been waiting 28 years in a box for me to be ready to feel it. Ovid had not simply put my name on a piece of paper he expected me to see someday. Filed away. Forgotten. He had cut it into wood, by hand, the same way he cut every mark he ever meant to last. He had marked me the way a man marks the one thing in a shop he does not intend to lose track of. And then he had turned it face down, and put it in a box, and driven past my daughter's house once in September, and never once knocked. Because he understood, better than I ever gave him credit for, exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. I was not grieving the money that night. I want that understood plainly, because I have had to explain it to more than one person since, and never once found the words to satisfy them. I was grieving 28 years of a friend who had seen me clearly enough to know I would need proof carved into something permanent before I would ever believe I had earned my own name. And who had loved me enough to wait, quietly, his whole life, for me to be ready to turn it over. I sat on that floor with the pattern in my lap until the sky outside started going gray at the edges, and Rule never once left my foot. And somewhere in that long gray hour, I understood something else, something I was not yet prepared to act on, but could no longer pretend I did not know. Whatever happened next, in whatever room it happened in, I was not going to be able to do it quietly this time. 28 years of quiet was exactly what had gotten me here. A gray sedan pulled into the drive at 9 o'clock the following Saturday morning, and the man who got out of it was carrying a leather portfolio that had cost more than the suit wrapped around him. "Grady Pell," he said, hand out before he'd fully closed the car door. "Elder wealth strategist. Kip's told me so much about you, Mr. Quist." "We," he said, from his second sentence onward. "We really want to make sure this transition goes smoothly for you. We think a legacy preservation trust is exactly the structure your family needs right now." He had a laugh that arrived a half beat before whatever was supposed to be funny, and a way of resting his hand flat on the table when he wanted a point to land, fingers spread, like he was steadying something that might otherwise slide away from him. He sat up at the kitchen table, like a man who had done this a great many times before, unpacking the portfolio with a practiced economy of motion. Laminated sheets fanned out in a particular order. A pen clipped to a leather folder that he clicked open and shut without seeming to notice he was doing it. His shoes were the kind that had never once touched gravel. His watch caught the kitchen light every time he gestured, which was often. Delphine poured coffee for everyone and did not sit down. Once the whole 40 minutes he talked. She stood at the counter, arms folded, and I watched her watch him the way you watch a salesman you have already half decided not to trust, but have not yet found the nerve to say so out loud. Pell walked us through the trust with a stack of laminated diagrams, arrows pointing from one box to another. Phrases like probate avoidance and asset protection, said with the easy confidence of a man who has said them so many times they have stopped meaning anything specific to him at all. Underneath the good paper and the careful language, it was a transfer. Irrevocable. Everything I owned moved into a structure I would no longer control. Administered, he said, by trustees to be named. He was good at his work, I will say that for him. He never once raised his voice or pushed too hard. He let silences sit, the way a real professional does. And he had answers ready for every objection before Delphine or I had fully finished raising it. Smooth transitions from one talking point to the next, the whole performance polished to the kind of shine that only comes from repetition. I found myself, more than once during those 40 minutes, having to remind myself deliberately that shine and substance are two entirely different things. A lesson 44 years in a pattern shop should have made unnecessary to relearn. I let him talk the whole 40 minutes. Then, when he'd finished and sat back with the particular satisfaction of a man expecting to be thanked, I asked him, mild as I could make it, where he'd gone to school. He named a university. Quick, easy. A small Midwestern name I did not recognize, but had no particular reason to doubt. I let a full minute pass, nodding along to something else he said. And then I asked which firm he'd trained under before going independent. He named a firm. Just as easy, just as quick. 20 minutes later, deep into a section about beneficiary designations, I asked him the same two questions again, worded almost exactly the same way. The tone of a confused old man who has simply lost the thread of where he'd already been. It is not a hard thing to do, forgetting a question you have already asked, when you are 70 years old and everyone in the room already half expects you to. The second time through, the university had changed. A different name entirely, spoken with the exact same easy confidence as the first. And the firm he'd trained under had become a different firm, one he described in slightly more detail than the first, as though the extra detail might paper over the fact that it was not the same answer at all. Neither Delphine nor Kip seemed to catch it. I am not certain either one of them was listening closely enough by that point to catch anything at all. The recorder in my coat pocket caught every word of it. That evening, Imogene called back before I'd even finished my supper. Grady Pell is not licensed to practice as a financial advisor or as an attorney in the state of Ohio, she said. He never has been. There's no record of him at either institution he named to you. I sat with the phone against my ear a long moment, looking out at the snow still coming down over the boulevard. There's something else you should know, she went on. I did some checking on the retainer he's working under. It was paid in full, up front, by your son-in-law. $12,000, from an account he opened 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. That put it right around the same time I had found a grab bar bolted into a wall for a man who did not yet need one. I hung up the phone and sat there a good while, Rule's head heavy against my foot, watching the snow keep coming down past the window, the same steady way it had 2 nights before, when I had sat on that same floor, turning a pattern over in my hands. There was something almost peaceful in it now, strange as that sounds. A man in a stranger's room above an upholstery shop, holding proof in his coat pocket that the ground he'd been standing on was rotten clean through, and feeling, for the first time in 15 months, that he finally knew exactly where he stood. I understood that whatever fear was driving Kip toward that mid-January date, he had been willing to spend what little he had left of it, hiring a man with no license at all, betting the whole of his family's future on a stranger's laminated diagrams. Because a man drowning does not always reach for the nearest true thing. Sometimes he reaches for whatever is closest, licensed or not, and grips it like it might actually hold. Imogene's office had that same flat, no-hiding-place light to it when I came in the first week of December. And this time, she did not wait for me to sit before she started. "The data logger came back," she said. "I had it read by an independent lab, not connected to my office in any way, so there could be no question later about the results." She turned her laptop around so I could see the chart myself. A jagged line, climbing and falling in a pattern that repeated itself night after night, like the same terrible song played over and over on a loop nobody had thought to turn off. I looked at that line a long while before I said anything at all. 44 years of reading gauges and dial faces and tolerance charts, and I understood, looking at it, that I was looking at the most honest measurement anyone had taken of my life in 15 months. Every other account of what had been happening to me, the blue notebook, the doctor's notes, the calendar taped inside a closet door, had been somebody else's interpretation of what they believed they were seeing. This was simply what had happened, recorded by a machine with no opinion about it either way. Climbing the same shape every single night, whether anyone believed it or not. 42 to 68 parts per million, she said. Consistent, every night, starting around 10 o'clock and running until roughly 6 in the morning. 21 nights straight. I asked her what that meant. In numbers I could actually hold on to. At that level, sustained overnight, for weeks. Headaches, confusion, memory lapses, disorientation. She let each word land on its own before she gave me the next one. Everything documented in Dr. Hutto's notes, Mr. Quist. Everything Delphine reported to him as decline. I sat very still with that. "The furnace technician confirmed it this morning," she went on. "The exhaust baffle on that space heater didn't fail. It was removed. By hand. There's no accidental way for that part to come loose the way it did." She had one more thing, and she told me plain, no softening it. Dr. Priya Nandakumar, a neuropsychologist out of Mansfield, had reviewed the whole file independently, at Imogene's request, blind to which side had commissioned it. Her finding is unambiguous. No evidence of cognitive decline. What she found instead is a pattern entirely consistent with chronic, low-level carbon monoxide exposure. The headaches, the disorientation, all of it. It wasn't happening in your mind, Mr. Quist. It was happening in that room. She slid one more page across the desk. A photograph of the laminated calendar from the closet door, the one I'd found myself that night in October. Care schedule, initialed in Delphine's careful hand, going back 3 weeks before the cake tin ever arrived. "This is the part that matters most, going forward," Imogene said. "The dates on this calendar predate any documented symptom. Someone began preparing a record of decline before there was anything to record. That's not observation, Mr. Quist. That's staging." I sat with the weight of that a long while, the chart still glowing on the screen between us. That same jagged line climbing every single night like clockwork. "This isn't civil anymore," Imogene said, quiet. "This is criminal." I thought about a bed with a grab bar bolted beside it. A blue notebook filled in good faith, 3 weeks running, by a daughter who believed, with her whole heart, that she was watching her father disappear. I thought about a 9-year-old girl on a cold back step, asking if I would forget her, because that was the story she had been told to prepare for. "Does my daughter know?" I asked. It was not the question Imogene had been expecting. I could see that in the small pause before she answered. "No," she said. "Everything I have points to her believing this is real. The notes, the calendar, the doctor's visits. She isn't part of the alarm. As far as I can tell, she doesn't know." I sat with that answer a long while. And I want to tell you it brought me some relief. And it did, some. But it also settled a colder weight onto my chest than anything else Imogene had told me that whole month. Because a daughter who had knowingly lied about her father would have been, in some strange way, easier to grieve than a daughter who had been telling the truth as she understood it the entire time, filling in a calendar in good faith, while somebody she trusted quietly poisoned the very air her father breathed each night. I thought about the two of us at that kitchen table. Delphine dishing out food she believed her father could no longer be trusted to prepare safely for himself. Watching him with the particular tenderness a person reserves for someone they believe is slipping away from them. Every kindness she had shown me those 3 weeks. Every careful question about whether I'd eaten, whether I'd taken my pills, whether I remembered what day it was, had been real. That was the part I could not get past, sitting in that office, with the chart still glowing on the screen. She had not been performing concern. She had been living inside a lie somebody else built for her, brick by brick, and calling it love the whole time. Because from where she stood, it was whatever came next, in whatever room it happened in. I was going to have to find a way to hold both of those things at once. My daughter's innocence in one hand, my daughter's blindness in the other. And somewhere between the two of them, whatever was left of the man I still needed to be when this was finally over. Gallion sits 13 miles from Bucyrus, a straight shot down Route 30, and I had not driven that road in 45 years. Not once, though I had thought about it more times than I could count. I want you to understand what those 13 miles cost me. Because they were not simple miles. I had told myself, across 4.5 decades, a dozen different reasons why I never made that drive. Too busy. Too far out of the way. No good reason to intrude on a man who had every right to want nothing more to do with me. I believe now that every one of those reasons was a small, respectable-sounding lie laid on top of the real one, which was that I had never once found the courage to sit across from Cyril Boy and hear, in his own voice, whatever it was he thought of me. It was easier, all those years, to carry my own version of the story than to risk having it corrected. Cyril Boy still lived in the same clapboard house his father had left him, white paint gone soft and chalky the way old paint does. A porch with 2 chairs and a view of a cornfield picked clean for winter. I sat in my truck at the curb a long while before I found the nerve to walk up that path, my heart going harder than it had any right to for a man simply paying a visit. He answered the door himself. 76 years old, still spry on his feet, and I watched him tuck his left sleeve into his pants pocket the way he must have done 10,000 times over 45 years. A habit worn so smooth it had stopped looking like an accommodation and started looking like nothing at all. Just a man arranging his clothes. "Delmar Quist," he said, and there was no accusation in it, no weight, just plain recognition. The way you'd greet anyone you had not seen in a long while. Well, I'll be. He invited me in for coffee, like it had been 45 weeks instead of 45 years. And I sat across from him at a kitchen table gone soft at the edges with age. And for a long while, I could not find the words for what I had come to say. I need to tell you something, I finally managed. About 1979, Cyril set his cup down, slow, and waited. I asked to have my name put on that job ticket, the coupling housing. I was proud of it, and I wanted the credit. And 6 weeks later, you lost your hand. And my name was sitting right there on the accident report. And I have spent 45 years believing that if I had never asked for that recognition, none of it would have happened to you. He was quiet a long moment. Then he did something I was not prepared for at all. He laughed. Not cruel, not bitter. A real laugh, the kind that comes up from somewhere honest. And he shook his head at me like I had said something genuinely foolish. Delmar, he said, you think you ruined my life? I've got 4 grandchildren. I coach Little League with 1 arm and beat men with 2 at horseshoes every summer at the fair. I've had 45 good years, near enough. And not one of them was less because of what happened to my hand. But my name, your name was on a piece of paper that cleared you of any fault at all, he said. I know. I kept a copy. Go on. Look in that drawer there. Second one down. I've had it since the week it came out. I opened the drawer. Found the report exactly where he said. 3 typed lines identifying a bad batch of alloy from a supplier 3 states over. No mention of any pattern maker's error at all. Filed and forgotten by everyone but the one man it should have set free. Cyril reached across the table and turned his coffee cup a quarter turn. A small, practiced motion I understood at once was something he had learned to do one-handed and no longer thought about at all. You want to know what I remember about that year, he said. It isn't the accident. It's a fellow named Delmar Quist showing up at County General 3 separate times that first week. Standing in the hallway because he didn't have the nerve to come in the room. And a nurse finally telling him he ought to just come in and say whatever it was he'd driven all that way to say. I did not remember that. Or I had not let myself remember it. Which amounts to the same forgetting in the end. I remember you standing there, not saying a single word about the ticket, or the accident, or any of it. You just sat with me an hour and talked about nothing at all. Baseball, I think. The Reds' chances that year. He smiled, small, at the memory of it. That's the part of 1979 I carried forward. Delmar. Not the hand. The hour. You didn't take my hand. Delmar, Cyril said. A bad piece of steel took my hand. What you took was 45 years of your own life, standing off to the side of every good thing that ever happened to you. Because you decided you didn't deserve to stand in the middle of it. I did not have an answer for that. I sat in his kitchen a long while, turning that report over in my hands. And I understood something I had not let myself understand in 45 years of carrying it. I had not been protecting Cyril all that time. I had been protecting myself from ever again standing in a room and hearing my own name read out loud over something that mattered. On the drive back into Bucyrus, I pulled over at the shoulder of Route 30. Snow starting to fall soft over the harvested fields. Engines still running. Heat blowing quiet against the windshield. I sat there a good while before I picked up the phone, turning over everything Cyril had said. The hour I did not remember giving him set against 45 years of a story I had told myself about a hand I never took. Both things had happened. I was only now sitting on that shoulder, with the snow coming down. Learning how to hold them side by side, instead of letting the second one swallow the first. I called Margot. "Is the shop open this Saturday?" I asked. She said it could be, if I needed it to be. "I think it's time," I told her, "that I stopped standing off to the side of my own life." The shop was warm that Saturday, the big propane heaters running since dawn, and by 1:45 the people I had come to think of, without ever quite deciding to, as my family had gathered in it. Ludi brought 2 apple pies she set on the workbench like it was the most ordinary thing in the world to bring dessert to a confrontation. Cyril sat near the door in a folding chair, his tucked sleeve catching the light every time he shifted. Margot stood at the layout bench, arms folded, watching the door the way she watched everything, careful and unhurried. Shown. Nell sat on the front step outside with Rule's head in her lap, close enough to hear, but far enough, I hoped, to be spared most of it. I had asked Margot the night before whether it felt strange, gathering everyone in the one place that had never once belonged to the family that had wronged me. She had not thought it strange at all. "This is the one room in this whole town," she'd said, "where the truth has always had to hold up under its own weight." Seemed like the only fair place to bring it. Kip arrived 20 minutes early. I noted that. A man who believes he is about to win does not usually rush toward the winning. "Dell," he said, coming through the door, rubbing his hands against the cold, grinning wide. "Good turnout. This is great. This is really great." Grady Pell came in behind him, portfolio under one arm, offering handshakes to people who did not particularly want to shake his hand. Delphine came last, standing just inside the door, coat still buttoned, the way she'd stood at that landing back in November, like she had not yet decided whether she was staying. I let Pell get comfortable. I let him set up his laminated sheets on the bench beside Ludi's pies, an arrangement so absurd I nearly laughed despite everything. Then, before he could begin his pitch, I asked him to do one thing for the room. "Read us page 9, I said, out loud. "The trust document." He blinked, reached for the folder, flipped to the page, and I watched something in his easy salesman's posture go stiff. "It's fairly technical language," he said. "I'd be happy to summarize the intent for everyone." "I didn't ask for the intent. I asked you to read it." He read 3 sentences before he stumbled, backtracked, tried again, and could not make the 4th sentence connect to anything that came before it. The room had gone very quiet by then. Quiet enough that I could hear the propane heater ticking against the far wall. Quiet enough that Ludi's fork, still resting against the edge of a pie tin, made a small sound when she finally set it down. Even Kip had stopped grinning. "You drafted this," I said. "Or you're presenting it as though you did. Which is it?" He did not answer that. He looked, for the first time since he'd walked through that door, like a man who had misjudged the size of the room he'd walked into. He set the folder down instead, slow, the way a man sets down something he has just understood is about to be taken from him. I laid the documents out on the bench myself then, one at a time, in an order I had thought carefully about, working backward through every small betrayal until we arrived at the first one. The trust agreement, unsigned. The 14-page power of attorney, page 9 still open where Pell had failed to read it. Grady Pell's licensing record, blank, from the state of Ohio, printed and dated the week before, and beneath all of it, the guardianship petition, filed 9 days before a cake tin ever came through Ludi Fairbank's door. "Dell," Kip started, and something in his voice had gone thin. "This isn't what it looks like." "Then tell me what it looks like." "Kip?" He did not have an answer for that either. I set one more thing on the bench. Last of all, a small black alarm, still fitted with a working battery, and I pressed the test button, and it screamed once into that warm, safe room, loud and sudden enough that Ludy's hand flew to her chest. "That's what should have been going off in my room every night for 3 weeks," I said, once the sound had died away. It didn't. Somebody made sure of that. Delphine's face had gone white by then, and she turned, slow, toward the man standing beside her. "Kip," she said, and her voice cracked clean down the middle on his name. "What did you do?" Nobody in that shop said anything for 11 seconds. I counted them, the way I count everything, and I have never in my life had 11 seconds stretch so long. Kip did not deny it. I want you to understand what that silence meant, because a lesser man would have reached for an excuse. And Kip had never once in 15 months been short on those. He simply stood there, the alarm's echo still hanging somewhere near the rafters, and he looked at his wife the way a man looks at the last solid thing under his feet just before it gives way. "I was trying to save us," he finally said. His voice had gone very quiet. "The house, everything. I was drowning. Delphine. And I didn't know how else." "You were poisoning my father," she said. Not a question. A fact, laid down flat and final, the way I had laid documents down on that bench a few minutes before. A woman I did not recognize stepped through the side door just then, unhurried, a badge clipped to her coat. Deandra Voss, from the county's Financial Crimes Unit. And she did not raise her voice a single time the whole of what came next. She simply walked Kip toward the back door, said something low I did not catch, and he went with her without a struggle, without another word to any of us, his face gone the color of the snow still falling outside the windows. The door swung shut behind them, slow on its hinge, and for a moment nobody in that shop moved at all. The propane heater ticked against the far wall. Somewhere outside, a truck went by on Southern Avenue, tires hissing on wet pavement, and the sound of it rose and faded without anyone in the room seeming to register it had happened. Ludy's hand was still pressed flat against her own chest, where it had gone when the alarm sounded, and she had not yet lowered it. Cyril sat very still in his folding chair, looking at the door Kip had just gone through, his face giving nothing away at all. Delphine sank down onto the nearest stool, and I watched 26 years of a story she had believed about her own life come apart in front of her, right there in a shop that smelled of shellac and birch dust. And I understood I was about to say the hardest, true thing I had ever said to my own child. "You told Dr. Hutto 4 times that I was slipping," I said. "You went home each time and turned that heater up a little higher in the room where I slept." She did not argue it. She could not have. All she did was look up at me, her whole face open in a way I had not seen since she was a very small girl, and say my name once. Small. Like a question she did not have the courage to finish asking. "I know you didn't know," I told her. "And every word of it cost me something I am still paying for. I believe that, Delphine. But not knowing isn't nothing. It's its own kind of harm. And I need you to understand that before anything else gets said between us today." She nodded. She did not try to defend herself further. And I have come to believe, since, that this was the first entirely honest thing to pass between us in 15 months. "Go home," I told her. "Find a lawyer of your own, and go take care of that little girl. Because whatever comes next for the rest of us, Nell did not choose one bit of it, and she is going to need her mother whole." She left without another word, and the shop settled slowly back into itself around the rest of us. Ludi already moving to cut the pies, like a woman putting a kitchen back in order after a storm. Cyril sitting quiet, with his one hand resting flat on his knee. Margot watching the door where Delphine had gone. When the room had finally emptied, I stood alone at the bench, and I picked up the pattern one last time. I turned it over, held it up under the shop light where everyone could have seen it, had anyone still been there to see. "D. Quist," I said, out loud, to an empty room. My own name spoken plain for the first time in 45 years over something that mattered. Then I reached for a pen to sign the intake sheet Margot had left for me on the bench. Some small piece of ordinary paperwork about the shop's winter schedule. Nothing that mattered at all in the larger scheme of that day. My hand would not hold steady enough to finish the cue. I looked at it a long moment. That hand that had held a chisel true for 44 years. That had sorted tools by size on a wet driveway without once dropping a single one. Shaking now over 4 letters that meant nothing at all next to what it had just carried through that room. I did not try again. I set the pen down flat on the bench, careful, the way you set down a tool you have decided is not the right one for this particular job. And I folded that unsteady hand into the other one and held them both still together in my lap. I sat on an overturned crate in the middle of that empty, ticking shop, and I did not cry, and I did not speak, and there was no one left to see me not doing either one. Just Rule, padding back in from the front step and settling his old bones down against my feet the way he always did, without being asked. Winter settled in proper after that. The kind of Ohio cold that gets into a man's knee and stays there through March. And I found I did not mind it the way I once had. I did not move into any of Ovid's real estate. I want you to know that plain. Because people have asked me since why a man worth $18 million kept paying $300 a month for a room above an upholstery shop. And the honest answer is that the room had earned its place in my life in a way none of that other property ever had the chance to. I renewed the lease in January for another 6 months, and Ludi did not charge me a dime more than she ever had, though I offered more than once. And she waved me off every single time. Kip's case moved through the courts the way such things do. Slow. With lawyers I did not much care to follow the details of. I heard, second-hand, that he took a plea. I did not attend that hearing. Some chapters, I have found, a man is better served closing quietly than watching close up. Delphine called in late January. First time in 6 weeks. I almost did not answer, and then I did. "Dad." Just that, at first. Then, after a silence neither one of us hurried to fill. "How are you doing? Really?" Not the money. Not the estate. Not the lawyers. Not one word about any of it. Just that plain question. The kind she had not once asked me in 15 months. "I'm managing," I told her, which was true, and which both of us understood was not the whole truth either. She did not push for more than that. I have come to believe that not pushing was its own kind of apology. The first one either of us had offered the other that had any weight to it at all. We talked 10 minutes. About Nell, mostly. About a counselor she had found for the two of them to see together. I did not tell her I forgave her, because I am not certain, even now, that forgiveness is a word I have fully earned the right to use about what happened in that house. But I did tell her I loved her, and I meant it exactly as much as I have ever meant anything. And she cried a little on her end of the line, quiet, and I let her. In March, Margot and I set up a scholarship fund at the shop. Small to start, enough for 2 trade school students a year out of Crawford County, tuition and tools both, named the Brannock and Quist Trades Fund. We did not make any ceremony of it. Margot simply hung a small plaque by the front door, and the first Saturday it was up, 4 of the young hands stopped to read it on their way in. And none of them said anything to me about it, which suited me fine. That same week, I finally hung the sign. It had sat in the storeroom since September, Margot told me, made and paid for before Ovid ever knew he was dying. Waiting on a wall he never got the chance to see it hung on. Brannock and Quist, in the same block lettering he'd burned into the lid of a wooden box. And I stood on a ladder myself to set it, my knee complaining the whole way up. And Rule watched from the floor with the particular patience of an old dog who has learned that some jobs simply take a man his own sweet time. I still have not said the words to Delphine that I know she is waiting to hear. I am not certain I have entirely found them yet, or that I am ready to mean them the way they deserve to be meant. That is its own kind of unfinished business, and I have stopped pretending otherwise, even to myself. But most evenings now, I walk down to the shop after supper, just to sit a while among the racks, Rule at my feet. And somewhere among all those names burned into wood, I find the one that took me 45 years and $18 million and 1 broken marking gauge to finally believe was mine to claim. The pattern hangs in the front window of Brannock and Quist now, face out, the way Ovid always meant for it to hang, though it took 2 men and 28 years to finally get it there. Evenings, when the street light catches it just right, you can read my name from clear across Southern Avenue. I still slow down some nights just to look at it from that distance, the way a man looks at a thing he built to see if it still holds true. Snow was falling the last time I stood out there looking at it, soft and straight down, no wind behind it. The same kind that was coming through the window the night I finally turned that pattern over on my own. Rule stood beside me on the sidewalk a good while, patient, the way he has always been patient with me. And neither one of us was in any particular hurry to go back inside out of the cold. I keep my father's marking gauge on the sample room windowsill, both halves, unmended. I have had the skill to fix it since the week I found it in that gutter. I have simply chosen not to. Some breaks, I have come to believe, are more honest left as they are, than smoothed back over into something that only looks whole. I used to believe that wanting my name on a thing was a kind of hunger a decent man learns to starve out of himself. 45 years. I called that starving humility, and I wore it like it was a virtue I had earned, rather than a wound I had simply learned to live around. I know better now, though knowing better has not made the wound disappear. It has only taught me to stop mistaking the scar for the cure. A pattern is not the thing. I told you once, at the start of all this, a pattern is what the thing gets made from. I still believe that, but I have come to understand something I did not understand the night I said it to you. 70 years old and soaked through in a stranger's doorway. The wood does not go back on the shelf because it does not deserve the name. It goes back on the shelf because somebody has to remember the shape well enough to make the next one true. That is not nothing. That was never nothing. It took a dead man's letter and a carved date, and a shaking hand that could not finish writing a single letter of my own name to teach me the difference. I do not know, even now, whether staying small all those years was humility, or simply fear wearing humility's coat. I suspect, if I am honest with you, that it was both. The way most of the truest things in a man's life turn out to be both at once, rather than one or the other cleanly. What I know for certain is only this. A man can spend a whole life making things other people get to sign and call it peace, and go on calling it peace, right up until the day somebody hands him a box with his own name burned into the lid and asks him, plainly, whether he ever once believed he'd earned it. Rule still sleeps in the corner nearest the window. Same spot he chose the first night Margot brought him up those stairs. He is slower now than he was that November, and some mornings it takes him a good while to get his legs working under him. And I have started leaving the bottom stair light on all night, so he does not have to find his way in the dark. I do not know how many more winters he has in him. I try, most days, not to do the arithmetic on that, though I am a man who has spent his whole life doing arithmetic. And some habits do not leave a person just because he asks them to. Delphine and I speak most Sundays now. Not every Sunday. Most. She asks after my knee, and I ask after Nell's schoolwork. And neither one of us has yet found the courage to say everything that still sits unsaid between us. And I have stopped believing that we owe it to each other to rush towards saying it before we are ready. Some doors, I have learned, open slower than others, and forcing one before its hinges are ready only cracks the frame around it. Nell sent me a piece of wood a few weeks back, through the mail. No note attached, just a disc cut clean through a branch with the rings counted out in her own careful hand. Same as that first one on the back step. 34 this time. I do not know where she found a branch with 34 rings in it, and I have not asked her. Some gifts, I have decided, are better left as mysteries. A man simply gets to keep. Here is the only question I have carried away from all of this that I believe is worth asking you tonight. And I do not have a tidy answer to offer alongside it. If you spent your whole life making something good and quietly letting someone else's name ride on top of it, would you call that peace? Or would you call it the slow, respectable way a person learns to disappear? I am not asking you to answer that for my sake. I have made my own peace with it, such as it is, some days more than others. I am asking because I have come to believe that most of us are doing some version of the same thing, in smaller rooms than mine, for smaller sums than $18 million. And most of us will never get a letter from a dead friend to make us finally turn the pattern over and look. If tonight is the night you decide to look anyway, I would consider it an honor to hear about it. Tell me, in your own words, what your version of that pattern has been. I read every single one. And if you have ever stood in a doorway that used to be yours and heard it lock behind you, and wondered whether you were ever going to matter to anyone again the way you once believed you did, I want you to hear this from a man who has been exactly where you are standing tonight. You were never the wood going back on the shelf. You were the hand that shaped everything that came after. Don't forget that. And don't let anyone convince you to carry that pattern face down for one day longer than you have to.